He died standing up. Leaning against the throne, his mouth open. Not words, but a stream of warm pus flowed out. His intestines fell onto the marble floor, and when the doctor rushed to pick them up, he heard one of the loops of the small intestines slosh, as if something foreign was laughing inside it. Innocent III did not die immediately. His decomposition began earlier, on the day when his intestines failed after a night of abdominal pain. At first, it was attributed to overeating. The pontiff refused porridge but demanded wine and shellfish. His face turned pale, his stomach swelled, a foul odor appeared, and when he tried to relieve himself, his stool was black and slimy. The next day, he did not get out of bed. It was June. Rome was sweltering. The rooms were hung with cloths to keep them cool, but by the third day, there was a smell of something rotten in the bedroom. The physician Benedetto Scopa, in his diary, later burned by order of the camera, wrote, "He stinks, not like a sick man, like a dead man." The servants began to carry out pots containing a murky, viscous mass. It contained clots and blood. One of the surgeon's assistants remarked, "We thought it was food. Then we realized it was part of him." Innocent demanded silence. He forbade anyone to enter his chambers without the sign of the cross. A bedside candle burned around the clock. He whispered that he was not alone, that something was moving inside him. After another attack, the doctor examined his abdomen and pointed to an unnatural swelling in his right side. Palpation caused the pontiff to laugh hysterically, then vomit. The vomit flowed onto the floor, leaving a pungent trail on the marble. The treatment was traditional: bloodletting at intervals of 24 hours, wax and vinegar ointments, and compresses with warm wine. Everything was useless. The skin on his abdomen turned purple-black, and on the third day, a gas-filled bulge formed above his navel. When it was pierced with a knife, air escaped with a pop, and the room fell silent for a moment. Pontifex screamed that something was coming out of him, and that he felt something foreign crawling through his intestines. He refused to eat. They had to force-feed him broth. Several times, black clots were noticed in his liquid food. One of the monks said, "This is not food. This is what is coming back out." His temperature remained at 41 degrees Celsius. His eyelids were swollen. His tongue was cracked. In the third week, his legs began to fail cramps, numbness, and then sudden necrosis of the tissues of his feet. The tips of the toes turned black. They were bandaged with linen cloth, but during the next dressing, one toe fell off. It was burned in the oven. There were whispers at court that the pontiff was possessed. Father Giacomo, an ascetic, claimed to have seen a black snake crawling out from under the sheet. He was expelled. The pontiff began to ask for deliverance from the devil. When exorcism was suggested, he refused. "He is no longer in me. He is me." The skin on his stomach split open. Dr. Scopa and his students performed a superficial autopsy. The intestines were rotten, grey-red, and sticky in places, like fat. The walls were thin and burst when touched. A liquid with the smell of rotten eggs and decay flowed out. In the third loop of the small intestine, they found something resembling a dense black knot. The doctors did not touch it. After the procedure, 5 people remained in the room. 2 died later. 1 went blind. 1 disappeared. The last one, Federico's apprentice, would later write, "I watched him rot and understood that rotting is not death, it is life in reverse." The corridor leading to the pontiff's chambers was blocked off. The smell came from there. One of the chamber officers wrote, "I can't breathe. The stench is not from the flesh. The stench is from the soul that does not want to leave." Innocent himself became silent. He refused to speak, but moved his lips. He followed the walls with his eyes. Several times he tore at his stomach with his fingernails. Once he almost reached the wound, they pulled him away. He only whispered, "Let him out." The priest who was allowed to hear his confession said that the Pope had not repented. He refused to name his sins. He only asked, "Seal my flesh. Don't let it come out again." Rumors spread throughout the city that bags of leprous cloth that could not be burned were being carried out of the papal palace, that the water in the wells smelled like meat, that horses were falling down near the cathedral, that children were being born with spots on their skin, the Pope's marks. On the 8th day of unconsciousness, the pontiff's abdominal wall burst. His intestines fell out partially, with a sloshing sound. One of the cardinals standing nearby fainted. Another crossed himself, then washed his hands in vinegar and swore, "I saw the devil come out, hissing. He wasn't inside, he was an organ." But the pontiff was still breathing. On the 9th day after his intestines fell out, Innocent III was still alive. His breathing was shallow and ragged. His eyes were cloudy but did not close. The mucous membrane of his mouth turned black. His tongue was covered with a coating, cracked in the middle, and barely fit in his mouth. The doctors, who changed almost every day, said in unison, "The body cannot live, but it is not dying." Pus continued to flow out. At first, it collected in pads, then began to drip through the sheets onto the wooden frame of the bed. In places where it dripped, the boards began to rot. A steady wet circle appeared under the bed, and when one of the servants tried to wash it out, he complained of a burning sensation in his hands. The doctors ordered a layer of lead plates to be placed under the body, but after a day, it was covered with spots and grey streaks. Internal pressure was building up in the body. The abdominal cavity began to rot from the inside, and the tissues became loose. During another attempt at treatment by the surgeon, it was noted, the abdominal muscle layer is practically absent. The intestines are disintegrating. The walls are softened and swamp-colored. A foul-smelling liquid is oozing out under slight pressure, like from an abscess. The pontiff tossed and turned at night, despite his immobility. The doctors believed that these were residual nerve impulses. But eyewitnesses noted that the movements of his head, hands, and even his fingers coincided with prayer gestures. One of his servants, Brother Vincenzo, wrote, "He seems to be praying in decay, but not to God." Meanwhile, tension was growing in the Curia. Outwardly, power remained in the hands of the College of Cardinals, but behind the scenes, a struggle was raging. The French and German factions argued over who would be the first to declare the pontiff incapable of governing. However, no one dared to make a statement. Superstition gripped the upper echelons. Cardinal Benoit, who had arrived from Avignon, left Rome 4 days later. In his note to the Bishop of Rouen, he wrote, "I will not go in there. They say that anyone who sees his face now will lose their mind." He was later found in a monastery near Lyon, where he renounced his priesthood and never spoke again. Documents began to disappear from the Vatican. Archivist Guido de Toro was arrested while attempting to remove one of Scopa's personal journals. During interrogation, he said, "I wanted to destroy it. I don't want anyone to know how it all began." He was executed quietly, at night. Meanwhile, the smell grew stronger. One of the doctors noted in a report, "The pontiff's room reeks of a putrid odor with a sour, iron-like tinge. It smells like old intestines boiled with wet wool. The smell did not escape through the windows or the stove hood. It permeated clothing. The servants began to burn their robes. Some cut up handkerchiefs to stuff into their nostrils." On the 14th day, the pontiff began to hallucinate. He tried to speak, and on the rare occasions when his words were intelligible, they were recorded by the abbot of the monastery of San Marco. From the report, he said that a doll with his face was sitting in the corner, slowly eating his liver. He asked for wine to be given to it. His pulse was almost imperceptible. However, when touched, his body felt warm. One of the monks wrote, "This is not the warmth of life, it is the warmth of burning flesh." The color of his skin changed. Spots appeared on his back yellow with a purple border. The skin detached from the muscles, leaving cavities filled with putrefactive gas. One of the surgeons, while attempting to puncture one of these cavities, suffered burns to the mucous membrane of his eye from the escaping steam. The internal organs continued to disintegrate. According to the doctor's description, the liver is loose and resembles boiled bread when cut. The spleen is twice its normal size. The blood is thick, dark, and hardly clots. At the moment of opening the vessels, one of the arteries burst, spraying a viscous jet. It had a faint, reflective sheen. Dr. Scopa noted, "This is not what the blood of a living person looks like. This is not life. This is decay under pressure." Despite the destruction of the tissues, cardiac activity persisted. Blood pressure was low. The heartbeat was rare but steady. One of the cardinals called it the beating of hell. Rumors spread throughout the courtyard that there was no soul in the pontiff's body, only a shell. One of the soldiers standing in the corridor at the entrance to the ward later said that he heard a voice saying, "I will not leave this flesh. It is rotting, and I am rotting with it." When questioned, he committed suicide by piercing his ear with a pen. At the same time, unrest began in Rome. Several itinerant preachers accused the Curia of hiding the dead pope through whom the devil works. One of them, a monk named Filippo, burned himself in Piazza Navona. Before his death, he shouted, "Peter's guts are now a stinking snake." In response, the Curia announced that the pontiff was alive but ill. Fake letters supposedly written by Innocent were published. "I ask you to pray for me, and for the world. I am in divine humility." The signature was forged. No one had seen the Pope's real hand for 3 weeks. Meanwhile, the body began to decompose in the upper chest. At the base of the neck was an open ulcer. Pus-filled blisters were visible through it. Once, during confession, a clot of mucus burst out of the ulcer. It fell on the bishop, who screamed. The next day, he developed a skin infection that led to gangrene in his fingers. In the corridor leading to the chambers, the walls were covered with mold. An attempt was made to clean it up, but the workers complained of convulsions, headaches, and a strange taste in their mouths. One of them died within 24 hours. Doctors diagnosed pulmonary edema and black coating on the teeth. By the 17th day, the pontiff's face was covered with a rash. Dark fluid oozed from his eyes. One eye sank into his skull. Fluid leaked from the other eye, which turned pale green. When one of the medics tried to wipe it with a cloth, the eye slipped out of its socket and hung from a tendon. Innocent continued to breathe. His lips moved, his chest rose, and no one knew why. On the 21st day after the beginning of his decay, the pontiff was still in a state that doctors did not dare to call life. His body was immobile, his muscles partially destroyed. His right arm was separating from his shoulder under the skin. According to the description of the medic, Eugenio, the structure is broken. Instead of muscle mass, there was a semi-liquid, porridge-like mass with the smell of rancid fat. The bone protruded when pressed. The lower jaw was dislocated due to constant convulsions. The corners of his lips were cracked, and black blood flowed from the cracks, forming clotted patches. The skin on the neck had slipped away, exposing blood vessels that were no longer pulsating. The hair on the crown of the head was damp and came out in tufts, along with the skin, when touched. One of the brothers helping to prepare the body lost consciousness when he barely touched the back of the head. Later, it became clear that under the hair there were ulcers and a dark coating. The rib cage at the base of the sternum had collapsed. As the body was turned over, there was a crunching sound, and several streams of pus containing flakes of decomposed flesh flowed out from under the shoulder blades. Judging by the description, the pontiff had begun to suffer a pneumothorax without surgical intervention. One of these streams hit the floor, leaving a brown stain that could not be washed away. Against this backdrop, the clergy increasingly raised the question of exorcism. The eldest cardinal, de Bassini, declared at a closed meeting, "He is not dying. That means his soul has not left him. And if it has not left him but cannot leave, then something stronger than death is preventing it." In response, part of the Curia objected, acknowledging the Pope's possession would undermine the authority of the entire Church. The dispute ended in a physical fight. One of the participants, Archdeacon Vincenzo, was found 2 days later with his eyes gouged out and his hands burned. His mouth was sewn shut with woolen thread. The people of Rome already knew. Regardless of official statements, the walls of the Vatican began to be covered with inscriptions. "He is not Peter, he is the mouth. Don't bless, you'll rip out his guts. The body is not a temple, but a tomb." Several prophets predicted a second birth through decay. One of them claimed to have seen flying creatures flying out of the windows of the chambers at night. Meanwhile, the pontiff's remaining consciousness manifested itself less and less frequently. Only once, on the 23rd night, did the priest who was present record, "He moved his lips. I leaned in. He said, 'He is whispering to me through my intestines.' Shortly thereafter, a new wound opened on his stomach deep, gaping, with a pulsating mass inside. The smell was indescribable. Those who entered the room said that the light grew dimmer and a ringing began in their ears. One of the surgeons, while attempting to excise the tissue, cried out and dropped his scalpel in his words. The tissue contracted as if something had pulled it from inside. He was dismissed. A week later, he hanged himself in his cell. The note he left contained only one word: "It's moving." The cardinals no longer approached him. All appointments were made through barriers. Priests refused to serve Mass for the repose of his soul. For the first time in the entire pontificate, the throne was physically abandoned. His throne was covered with black cloth, and no one dared to touch it. Even the guards stood at a distance. No one paid for the food brought to his chambers. The porters refused. Meals were cancelled. On the 28th day, the body began to make sounds, not a moan or a rattle, but rhythmic, slurping vibrations that coincided with a rare pulse. One of the monks said it was as if someone was chewing inside his stomach. He disappeared that same night. The clothes found in his cell were soaked in vinegar and covered in wax. At the same time, something else happened. On the marble slab where the pontiff's entrails had previously fallen, a stain appeared, shaped like a human silhouette in a kneeling position. Craftsmen tried to scrape it off, but it kept coming back. They covered it with a bronze plate. One of the craftsmen later gouged out his own eyes. An attempt to perform an exorcism took place on the night between the 31st and 32nd days. 4 ministers, 2 priests, and 3 guards were gathered. The ceremony lasted 28 minutes. No one said anything afterwards. One of the guards shot himself in the face. The second lost his hearing. The priests refused to talk. From the testimony, I felt that he could hear, and not the Pope, but what was inside, and it knew all our names. After that, the Curia ordered preparations for the funeral to begin. Despite biological signs of life, doctors, under pressure, signed a death certificate. The body was declared dangerous. But the pontiff was breathing. He was breathing, and that was enough to keep anyone from daring to approach him. On the 40th day, the pontiff's breathing stopped. Not suddenly, but as if it had dissolved. A witness, Cardinal Laurencio, claimed, "I stood at his feet, and I felt the stench intensify and then suddenly disappear, as if someone had breathed for us." Touching the body, Felice said, "Cold, perfectly cold, like a stone that can no longer absorb anything." An autopsy was officially prohibited. However, according to reports from an internal commission made for official use, the body was in a state of advanced gangrene. The intestines had turned into a gelatinous mass that oozed out through the ruptures in the abdomen with any movement of the body. The liver had detached. The spleen had burst. The heart, according to the surgeon, looked like an ink sac, hollow, shriveled, covered with ulcers. The eyes had disappeared literally. The right eye had fallen out, and the left had dissolved into the orbital mucus. The jaw of the frozen face hung down, and black pus continued to drip from it. The smell did not diminish. The body did not cool completely. One of the monks said, "He is not a corpse, he is a rotting statement." The guards refused to touch the body. A special team was called in from Siena people who had been involved in handling the bodies of plague victims. They were given silver masks, leather robes, and pots of tar ointment. A crucifix was left at the entrance to the chambers, which had darkened by morning. One of the workers died, another fled to Umbria, and a third lost his speech. Their testimonies have not been preserved. The transfer of the body to the crypt was accompanied by unforeseen difficulties. The body was decomposing. When it was lifted from the bed, a piece of the shoulder blade fell off. The skin was peeling off in layers. Corpse fat was oozing from the lower part of the body. Several workers slipped. They were dismissed. Under the bed, they found a mass resembling matted hair and teeth. It was immediately burned. The description was not documented. According to rumors, one cardinal insisted on silence, saying, "Do not call these remains. It was a vessel." The coffin was sealed with wax and lead. No priest wanted to conduct the service. The speech was read by soldiers. The prayer was general, with no mention of names. There was a deathly silence in the square. It was said that even the pigeons flew away. The crowd parted. Some spat on the ground. One boy cried out, "Mom, he's under my skin!" and died that same night. The body was placed in the catacombs under the chapel. The chamber was sealed with a triple sign. One of the bishops at the council said, "We did not bury the pontiff. We have sealed evil." A week later, cracks began to appear in the foundation of the cathedral. They were covered with lime. News of the pontiff's death spread quickly, but it did not cause grief. The French and German parties in the Curia announced elections for a new head. The Italian cardinals boycotted them. A struggle began, which soon escalated into armed clashes. The corpse had not yet cooled, and swords were already flashing in the corridors. An ambassador arrived from Regensburg, declaring that Innocent's death was punishment for impiety and fear of reform. A letter arrived from Paris in which the new King of France refused to recognize the legitimacy of any successor elected before a complete revision of the church canons. Rebellions broke out in Poland. In Naples, the ecclesiastical court was burned down. Throughout Europe, people said, "Decay is justice, and the body of the Pope is proof." The people ceased to believe in immortality. They tore down images of the pontiff. Some bishops left their countries disguised as beggars. The first anti-clerical pamphlets appeared in Rome. He was more alive than the dead, and more dead than the living. His intestines spoke, but did not pray. One of them was found nailed to the gate of the basilica with the inscription, "He rotted on the outside because he was empty on the inside." Later medical treatises, in particular, On the Decay of Power and Flesh, by the physician Alberto Strigiani, claimed, "The case of Innocent is unique. It demonstrates the limits of decomposition." His death did not occur. It was prolonged, becoming the consequence of a spiritual catastrophe rather than an illness. His organs refused to die because they were servants of fear. His descendants said, "He did not die. He fell apart, like dogmas, like faith, like Rome." And in the archive where his personal documents were kept, 10 years later, an unsigned note was found. It contained only one sentence: "I can feel him moving. I am no longer in control of my hands." Thus ended an era, not by death, but by decay.